Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of sources, pull them apart, and give you the essential distilled knowledge.
Today, we are focusing on one of the most compelling and commercially recognizable figures in all of modern art, the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo.
And her face is just everywhere. It's a striking, flowered, piercing gaze that has become a true icon.
Well, and that visual ubiquity is exactly why we need this deep dive.
Yeah.
Her image has become so recognizable globally that the icon, it often completely eclipses the genuine complexity of the woman.
And the revolutionary depth of her art.
Exactly. I mean, she was a prolific Mexican painter, known for portraits, self-portraits, drawing inspiration so deeply from Mexican nature and artifacts. But what often gets whitewashed in the global commodification is the sophisticated way she used this work.
To do what exactly?
To explore these really brutal themes of identity, post-colonialism, gender, class, and race, all in the context of post-revolutionary Mexico.
So that's our mission today. We are unpacking the dense biographical and critical sources shared by you, the listener, to uncover the crucial, painful, and often contradictory details that truly define Kahlo.
Right, from the lifelong physical suffering that scarred her body and her canvases.
To her unwavering political commitments and her, fascinating resistance to being pigeonholed by the European art establishment.
And we should probably start by just acknowledging the sheer market power of her name today. I mean, for you, the listener, you need to know that her legacy is financially monumental.
It's staggering. We have to highlight the recent record. Her 1940 self-portrait, The Dream, The Bed, was sold at auction for, what's it?
A breathtaking $54.7 million.
Wow.
And that price just shattered the auction record for any female artist.
Yeah.
So while this confirms her status as a global phenomenon, it immediately sets up the central tension we have to explore, the incredible, almost unbelievable commercialization of an artist whose entire life was rooted in revolutionary anti-capitalist politics.
Okay, let's begin at her starting point. Let's root ourselves in her world in Coyoacán. She was born Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo Calderón. And her background itself, the sources really suggest, was a blueprint for the hybridity and dualism that would later define her art. So who were her parents? How did they shape her early identity?
Well, her parentage was this cultural blend, which was, very typical of turn-of-the-century Mexico and yet totally unique to her narrative.
Okay.
Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, was a professional photographer born in Germany. And the sources confirm he was Lutheran, even though Frida later claimed a Jewish heritage.
Why would she do that?
It was likely to further romanticize her anti-establishment identity. And then her mother, Matilde Galdoni Gonzalez, was mestiza of indigenous Purépecha and Spanish descent.
So right there, you have this internal dualism.
Exactly. German/European versus indigenous/Mexican.
Yeah.
And that provided the fertile ground for her entire lifelong exploration of identity.
And the setting for all of this was, of course, La Casa Azul, the Blue House. It became her personal universe.
It really did. La Casa Azul was where she spent the vast majority of her childhood and her adult life. It was more than a home. It became this living museum of her Mexican identity, filled with pre-Columbian artifacts and folk art.
But the internal family life? It wasn't so idyllic.
No, it was tense. Her parents had a loveless, pretty volatile marriage, and Frida often clashed with her mother, Matilde, whom she later described in rather chilling terms.
What did she say?
She called her calculating, cruel, and fanatically religious, though she also conceded she was kind, active, and intelligent. It was complicated.
The sources reveal that the narrative of her life is just tragically interwoven with affliction, starting almost as soon as she could walk.
It really did. She contracted polio at the age of 6, and the lasting effects were immediate and profound. The disease resulted in muscle wasting that left her right leg visibly shorter and thinner than her left.
And that physical difference immediately set her apart.
Oh, completely. She had to endure this cruel bullying, with children calling her Frida Pegleg. But this isolation, its early experience of disability, it actually forged an intense, special bond with her father, Guillermo.
Because he had his own health issues.
Right, exactly. He himself suffered from epilepsy. So they had this shared, unspoken understanding of physical fragility.
Her father's influence sounds absolutely critical. He seems to have provided her with not just comfort, but the core intellectual and artistic foundation she really needed to channel that isolation.
He was monumental for her. Kahlo said, "He was an immense example to me of tenderness, of work, and above all, an understanding for all my problems.
And he was a photographer.
Skilled commercial photographer. And he taught her far more than just technical skills. He introduced her to literature, philosophy, nature. And crucially, she helped him retouch and hand color his photographs.
Oh, wow. So she was manipulating images from a young age.
Yes. This early hands-on exposure to manipulating images, isolating subjects, framing reality through a lens, it profoundly influenced her later painting style. You can see it in its photographic clarity and that very frontal presentation.
Before she became the world-renowned painter, though, she had a very different, highly ambitious professional track in mind.
She was academically brilliant. I mean, far from the typical female student of her time. She studied natural sciences at the elite National Preparatory School, aiming specifically to become a physician.
That's incredible for the era.
It was a progressive and highly competitive environment. She was one of only 35 girls among 2,000 students. And it was here, in this rebellious atmosphere, that she also formed a fiercely nonconformist, politically active group called the Cachuchas.
And it was during this period of growing political awareness that she really started actively shaping her own public biography.
Yes, she was already cultivating an identity deeply committed to Mexicanidad and revolutionary ideals. Well, to symbolically align herself with the defining national conflict, the Mexican Revolution, she made a deliberate biographical alteration. She falsely claimed her birth year was 1910, marking herself as a daughter of the revolution.
When was she actually born?
1907. So this act of self-fashioning, of curating her own narrative to enhance its political resonance, is maybe the earliest example of the profound relationship between her life and her art.
So we have this brilliant, rebellious, highly motivated young woman with clear scientific and intellectual ambitions. And then in 1925, everything shattered.
Yeah.
The defining accident, the description of this event in the sources is truly, truly horrific.
It was life-altering. On September 17, 1925, she was on a bus that was violently struck by a streetcar. The violence of the impact was immense.
And she was impaled.
She was impaled by a steel iron handrail. She described the trauma herself as feeling the way a sword pierces a bull. The handrail entered her back and exited through her pelvis.
I can't even imagine.
And it required several men, including her friend Alejandro Gomez Arias, to forcibly remove it right there at the scene before she could even be transported.
When you look at the sheer list of resulting medical damage, it's just astonishing she survived it all.
The sources detail injuries that would define the rest of her life. Her pelvic bone was fractured in multiple places. Her abdomen and uterus were severely punctured. Her spine was broken in 3 places.
It just keeps going.
11 fractures in her right leg, and her right foot was crushed and dislocated. She spent a month hospitalized and then returned home, forced to wear these heavy, painful plaster and leather corsets to stabilize her spinal column.
So the medical dream ended instantly. It was replaced by a lifetime of chronic, unremitting pain. A friend captured it perfectly, saying she lived dying. How did this immense physical confinement turn her focus back to art?
Well, this enforced physical imprisonment, months and months of just lying flat, was the catalyst. She couldn't pursue her medical studies, so her mother recognized her profound depression and took action.
What did she do?
She provided Kahlo with a specialized easel, custom-made so she could paint while lying on her back. Her father provided the oil paints. And most crucially for the history of art, a mirror was placed above her bed so that she could see her own face.
And that mirror transformed a practical solution into a profound artistic movement. It's almost startling how direct her rationale was for painting herself, considering the deeply complex works that resulted.
Her explanation was disarmingly pragmatic, yet so revealing. She said, "I paint myself because I am often alone, and I am the subject I know best."
Simple as that.
In those early works created during her confinement, she was still actively experimenting. She drew inspiration from European Renaissance figures. You can see the delicate drawing style of Botticelli and the cold frontal portraiture of Bronzino.
She was also looking at more modern movements too, right?
Oh, yeah. She was engaging with contemporary movements like Cubism and Germany's Neue Sachlichkeit, or New Objectivity. It was a period of intense artistic learning, all conducted from the confines of her bed.
So let's fast forward a few years. She recovered enough to socialize again, which led her right back into political circles, specifically the Mexican Communist Party, the PCM, in 1927.
Right.
And that's where she re-encountered the colossal and already famous figure of Diego Rivera.
She'd known of him since she was a student, but the real engagement came when she actively sought him out at a party hosted by the photographer Tina Modotti.
She just walked up to him.
She approached him directly, carrying her early paintings, and asked for his brutally honest assessment of her talent. She needed a professional verdict on whether art was a viable path for her future.
And did he give her an immediate, unvarnished opinion?
He was immediately and overwhelmingly impressed. He recalled noticing the unusual energy of expression, precise delineation of character, and true severity in her work, even in those early stages.
So he saw it right away.
He instantly recognized her as an authentic artist. And for Kahlo, securing that endorsement from the dominant male artistic figure in Mexico, well, it was a huge psychological and professional boost.
And that launched them into their intensely famous, volatile relationship, leading to their marriage in 1929. They were famously nicknamed a marriage between an elephant and a dove.
Yes, due to their stark physical differences. It was a visual contrast that captivated everyone. Rivera was 21 years her senior, massive in stature, while Kahlo was diminutive and physically fragile due to her chronic pain.
But there was a pragmatic side to it all, wasn't there?
Oh, very much so. What's often overlooked in the romance is the practical aspect of their union. While her mother opposed the marriage, her father, Guillermo, approved.
And the sources are clear on the reason why.
They are. Rivera was a successful, wealthy artist, which meant he was financially capable of covering Kahlo's perpetually expensive and necessary medical treatments for the rest of her life. The marriage was rooted in artistic respect, volatile love, and really medical necessity.
So once she's married to Rivera and actively pursuing her art, Kahlo undergoes this major artistic shift. She moves deliberately away from those European masters she studied in her confinement toward a robust celebration of Mexican culture.
And this is tied completely to the concept of Mexicanidad. So how do we define this, and why was it so important in the 1920s and 30s?
Okay, so Mexicanidad was a profound cultural and political ideology, and it emerged directly from the devastation of the Mexican Revolution. It represented a passionate, romantic nationalism.
What was it fighting against?
It sought to overturn centuries of colonial-era thinking, the idea that European culture, art, and fashion were inherently superior. It placed immense value on Mexico's indigenous cultures, folk traditions, and native artifacts.
So it was a revolutionary rejection of cultural inferiority.
Exactly. It was about asserting a distinct, powerful national identity.
So how did this political and cultural commitment translate directly into her painting style?
Well, it meant a conscious and deliberate move away from oil techniques, perspective, and subject matter that mimicked European conventions. She began to draw inspiration from Mexican folk art.
She started incorporating techniques derived from pre-Columbian and colonial art. This often meant embracing a characteristic lack of realistic perspective, a technique often associated with Mexican popular arts.
So she wasn't just painting Mexican subjects, she was adopting a whole Mexican visual language.
Yes, which in that era was a powerful anti-colonial statement.
A key part of her stylistic signature is her adoption of the retablo format. Now, she chose this highly specific, small-scale folk art form, which positioned her in stark contrast to the dominant muralists of the time.
Like Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros, with their massive public works.
Right. Why was this choice so impactful?
This was a subtle but profound artistic and political choice. So for you, the listener, retablos are small, usually postcard-sized devotional paintings. They're often painted on tin or metal sheets by amateur folk artists.
And what's their purpose?
They traditionally serve as votive offerings, a way of thanking a specific saint or the Virgin Mary for a miracle, usually surviving a severe illness, accident, or some calamity.
A perfect parallel for her own life, which was defined by accident and recovery.
Exactly. The retablo format allowed her to focus on a distilled narrative allegory. She could take these complex, catastrophic personal events, her accident, a miscarriage, her health crises, and concentrate them into a visual, emotional core.
And often depicting the injury or the pain in excruciating detail.
Yes. And because retablos are figure-focused and generally lack realistic perspective, she could convey intense, raw emotions so efficiently. Her dedication to this form was immense. La Casa Azul displayed an enormous collection of nearly 2,000 actual retablos.
Wow.
So critics argue that by working within the limits of this small, traditional format, she was able to develop her unique power of narrative iconography.
This brings us directly to the debate that has followed her ever since the late 1930s, the Surrealism debate. She was endorsed by the movement's founder, André Breton, who was captivated by her work.
Breton was certainly the one who first brought her international fame in the New York art world. He met her in Mexico in 1938, and was instantly captivated by her blend of the fantastic and the real.
And he immediately claimed her as a surrealist.
He did, coining that famous phrase that her art was a ribbon around a bomb. Breton believed her work was the purest expression of surrealism because, he theorized, she was developing her style in total ignorance of the movement's European theories.
So he saw her as a kind of naive, authentic genius of the subconscious.
That's the idea.
But the sources make it crystal clear that Kahlo absolutely rejected this label, didn't she? She hated being called a surrealist.
She actively detested it. She referred to the movement as bourgeois art and complained that it wasn't the true art that the people hoped from the artist.
So she felt they were just co-opting her.
Yes, she felt they were trying to co-opt her painfully authentic personal expression, which she saw as autobiographical reality rooted in Mexican culture, and turn it into some arbitrary European dream logic construct.
And she had that famous quote.
They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality.
So if she rejected the surrealist label so vehemently, where do art historians currently place her?
It remains contentious, but most look toward classifications that center on her subjective experience and her cultural roots. Many categorize her as a symbolist painter.
Meaning what?
Meaning they emphasize her concern with portraying her inner life, her psychological pain, and her political convictions using a consistent lexicon of objects. Others lean toward magical realism or new objectivity.
And that view holds that her unique blend of fantasy and reality derived not from Freud, like the Surrealists,
but from these deep wells of Aztec mythology and Mexican cultural tradition. She used flattened perspective, clear outlines, and intense bright colors to create this reality.
Regardless of the label, her work is characterized by incredibly dense, specific, and often painful personal symbolism, and she leveraged that to discuss those massive social questions: gender, race, class, identity, in revolutionary Mexico. Let's spend some time breaking down the function of these key images she returned to again and again.
Absolutely. If you look closely at her paintings, you see a consistent vocabulary. Let's start with roots and trees. Roots frequently emerge from her body and connect her to the earth, but the symbolism is deeply complex.
It's not just one thing.
Not at all. On one hand, roots can signify personal growth, unity with the land of Mexico, and historical continuity, like in My Grandparents and I from 1936.
Right.
A ribbon connects her to an ancient, massive tree bearing the portraits of her ancestors, rooted firmly in the earth. However, roots can also be negative, symbolizing being trapped, immobilized, or consumed by the past.
And the trees themselves?
Trees themselves are often figures of hope, strength, and continuity across generations, linking her fragile body to something ancient and enduring.
We also often see very different symbolic uses of hair. There's the long, elaborate, traditional Mexican style, and then the dramatic violence of the cropped style.
Yes, hair universally symbolizes femininity, vitality, and growth in her work. The most dramatic reversal comes in self-portrait, with cropped hair from 1940 painted immediately after her first painful divorce from Rivera.
What's happening in that painting?
She depicted herself in a masculine suit, surrounded by the thick, shorn locks littering the floor. But the sources highlight the critical detail. She's holding the scissors, a sharp, phallic symbol menacingly close to her genitals.
So it's not just an aesthetic act.
No, it's interpreted as an act of fury and defiance toward Rivera's frequent infidelities. It's as if she's saying that if he didn't want the feminine Frida, she would reject that femininity entirely.
It also speaks to her unease with Mexican machismo.
Yes, which she felt threatened to cut up women.
She constantly pulled on deep cultural history, often weaving in figures and concepts from Aztec mythology.
Her commitment to Mexicanidad made Aztec iconography indispensable. We see the frequent use of monkeys, skeletons, skulls, blood, and hearts. These are references to the great indigenous myths, like the stories involving Coatlicue, the earth goddess, or Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent.
And what was she exploring with these symbols?
She used them to emphasize the powerful forces of nature, creation, and destruction. But most importantly, these myths helped her explore hybridity and dualism, life-death, pre-modern, modern Mexican Europeans, and perhaps most famously, male-female.
which you see in her own sexuality and her rejection of gender norms.
Exactly.
And finally, she connected her personal grief to broader cultural suffering through Mexican folklore.
Yes, she was brilliant at leveraging culturally recognized figures to amplify her personal experiences. She often portrayed herself in connection with central female figures of Mexican misfortune, like La Llorona and La Malinche.
La Llorona, the weeping woman who murdered her own children.
She is often evoked when Kahlo paints her own agony, especially after her miscarriages. For example, in Henry Ford Hospital from 1932, her disheveled hair, open heart, and visible weeping explicitly link her private pain to the shared societal experience of female suffering.
So she made her personal pain national.
That's a perfect way to put it. She made her pain national.
So the 1930s saw Kahlo accompany Diego Rivera to the United States for his massive mural commissions. From 1930 to 1933, they moved between San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. And initially, it seems she was known primarily as the colorful, eccentric wife of the famous painter.
She certainly entered the United States under the shadow of Rivera. She publicly framed herself as merely his spouse, particularly in the initial press coverage.
But San Francisco was a productive period for her.
A critically productive period. The 6 months they spent there marked a time where she began really refining her distinct folk art style. She created works like Frida and Diego Rivera, 1931, a captivating double portrait based on their wedding photo.
And she had her first exhibition there.
Yes, crucially, she participated in her very first exhibition, the 6th annual exhibition of the San Francisco Society of Women Artists.
The next stop, Detroit in 1932, seems to have been a turning point defined by intense emotional and physical struggle.
Detroit was a period of high friction and immense suffering. She deeply disliked the city, finding its capitalist culture boring and the sheer disparity between the wealthy elites and the struggling masses repulsive.
And she had to socialize with figures like Henry Ford.
Yes, she resented it. She wrote back home expressing a bit of a rage against all the rich guys here, noting they were partying while thousands outside the factories were starving. This environment just fueled her political critique.
And her personal life was besieged by tragedy during this time as well.
Immense health problems. She had a major health crisis related to a failed pregnancy, culminating in a devastating miscarriage in July 1932.
Which resulted in a severe hemorrhage and weeks of hospitalization.
Yes. And to compound that trauma, her mother passed away in Mexico from surgery complications less than 3 months later. The emotional and physical weight was almost unbearable.
And we see that trauma immediately translating into a new, more explicit artistic direction.
Absolutely. Her paintings from the Detroit period showed a distinct move toward a powerful narrative style, explicitly emphasizing themes of terror, suffering, wounds, and pain.
This is where she really adopts the retablo medium.
This is where she definitively adopted it for her intensely autobiographical works. Henry Ford Hospital is a prime example, depicting her miscarriage with visceral honesty. She also created self-portrait on the border of Mexico and the United States.
Right, which dramatically juxtaposes pre-Columbian artifacts against smoking industrial factories.
Articulating her political discomfort with her northern neighbor perfectly.
She did start to gain some attention in the press there, but the tone of that coverage was notoriously condescending.
Oh, it was infuriating. One interview was titled, "Wife of the Master Mural Painter Gleefully Dabbles in Works of Art." Dabbles.
Yeah.
This dismissive attitude deeply frustrated her, but it also provoked a brilliant, confident response that really showcases her self-assurance. She countered the reporter, stating plainly, "Of course, Rivera does well for a little boy, but it is I who am the big artist."
That's an amazing quote. And this was in 1932.
Yes, she was already keenly aware of her own talent, regardless of her husband's fame.
Her real international ascent started a few years later in New York, largely catalyzed by the French Surrealist André Breton.
In 1938, Breton, who had already claimed her as one of his own, arranged her first solo exhibition at the Julian Levy Gallery in New York, and when she arrived, she was a phenomenon.
Because of her dress, her look?
Yes, her traditional, colorful Mexican dress, which she wore partly out of political commitment to Mexicanidad and partly to disguise her leg, it caused a sensation. The press positioned her as the height of exotica.
And the exhibition itself was a significant success.
It was. The opening was attended by major figures like Georgia O'Keeffe. She sold half of the 25 paintings displayed, achieving significant financial validation.
And she got commissions from that show.
Critically, she earned commissions from influential figures, including a Congra Goodyear and Claire Booth-Luce, the latter commissioning the now shocking portrait of the suicide, Dorothy Hale, which further cemented her reputation for uncompromising subject matter.
However, the subsequent year saw a dramatic shift in fortune when she traveled to Paris for an exhibition also arranged by Breton. This sounds like an organizational and financial disaster.
It was a fiasco that just reinforced her low opinion of the Surrealists. She sailed to Paris in January 1939, but Breton, who was utterly disorganized, hadn't even managed to clear her paintings from customs. And when they were finally displayed, he compounded the insult by insisting her serious, often painful autobiographical works be shown alongside what Kahlo scornfully called junk, oddities, children's toys, and Mexican sugar skulls he had arbitrarily purchased in markets. The gallery owner was so confused by the assemblage that they initially refused to show most of her paintings, finding them too shocking or unconventional. The entire exhibition was a financial loss.
So she had this awful experience, yet the sources confirm the trip ultimately cemented her international status. What was the mitigating factor?
Well, the recognition came from the true art establishment, not the Surrealists. Despite the financial disaster and her description of the Surrealists as cuckoo lunatics and rotten, the trip resulted in one monumental success.
And what was that?
The Louvre purchased the frame. This made Frida Kahlo the first Mexican artist and only the second female non-French artist to be featured in their permanent collection.
Wow.
Moreover, she was warmly received by masters like Pablo Picasso and Joan Miró, and the fashion world, captivated by her look, embraced her. Vogue Paris featured her, and designer Elsa Schiaparelli created a dress specifically inspired by her. The artist was recognized even if the exhibition was a flop. So following her return to Mexico in 1934, her personal life became just as chaotic and painful as her physical health. She suffered severe health problems, an appendectomy, 2 abortions, the amputation of gangrenous toes.
But the emotional devastation was perhaps worse?
Yes. She discovered that Rivera was having a long-running public affair with her younger sister, Cristina.
That infidelity led to their first divorce in 1939. How did that period of separation influence her emotionally and artistically?
The divorce in November 1939 spurred deep emotional trauma and an outpouring of some of her most complex work, including the 2 Fridas. She was devastated by the betrayal.
But the separation was relatively brief.
Very brief. They reconciled and remarried in a civil ceremony in December 1940, establishing a new, more independent relationship. They remained friendly, lived close by, but acknowledged their mutual need for independence.
And both continued to pursue extramarital affairs.
They did, though the sources suggest that, for Kahlo, her male lovers were often psychologically and emotionally more significant than her affairs with women.
Her life, meanwhile, was intersecting directly with global political drama due to her involvement in the Fourth International.
Yes, she was a committed member of the Communist Party. And in 1937, she and Rivera petitioned the Mexican government to grant political asylum to Leon Trotsky, the exiled former leader of the Soviet Red Army, and his wife.
And they lived with her at La Casa Azul.
They lived as guests at La Casa Azul from 1937 to 1939. This proximity led to a brief but intense affair between Kahlo and Trotsky, which she memorialized in self-portrait, dedicated to Leon Trotsky.
And the political fallout was huge.
When Trotsky was assassinated in 1940, shortly after leaving La Casa Azul, Kahlo was actually briefly arrested and questioned by police for 2 days on suspicion of being involved because she knew the murderer.
Wow. Beyond painting and direct political action, she found a different outlet for her revolutionary commitment by becoming an educator in the 1940s.
She did. In 1943, she accepted a teaching position at the nationalist Escuela Nacional de Pintura, Escultura y Grabado, known as La Esmeralda.
But her health made the commute impossible.
So in classic Kahlo style, she simply moved her classroom to La Casa Azul.
What defined her teaching style? Did she teach traditional European techniques?
Oh, not at all. Her style was deeply unconventional and entirely nationalistic. She completely rejected European norms in favor of emphasizing Mexicanidad. She encouraged her students to immerse themselves in Mexican popular culture, folk art, and pre-Columbian history.
Urging them to find their subjects from the street.
Exactly. Her 4 most loyal and devoted students became famously known as Los Fridos. Her goal was to instill a sense of cultural pride and revolutionary purpose in their art.
It was also during the mid-1940s, right as her health began its final catastrophic decline, that her financial and critical success in Mexico finally matched her talent.
Yes, she finally found financial stability and recognition at home. She stopped compromising her style for clients and achieved critical mass. She won a significant 5,000 peso national prize for her painting Moses in 1945.
And the 2 Fridas was purchased by a major museum.
Even more importantly, yes, the two Fridas, arguably her most famous work, was purchased by the prestigious Museo de Arte Moderno in 1947.
So she had really made it.
By the middle of the decade, her paintings were featured in the majority of group exhibitions in Mexico. Biographers note that she had reached a point where she could sell whatever she was currently painting. Sometimes incomplete pictures were purchased right off the easel.
This artistic peak, however, coincided with a horrific and rapid physical decline that ultimately consumed the last decade of her life.
The spinal problems became unmanageable. Between 1940 and her death in 1954, she was forced to wear 28 different supportive corsets.
28.
Ranging from rigid steel and leather to plaster casts. A major bone graft surgery failed catastrophically in 1945, leaving her immobile. She spent much of 1950 hospitalized, undergoing painful follow-up surgeries that offered no lasting relief.
So she was increasingly confined to her bed at La Casa Azul,
relying on crutches and a wheelchair to move even short distances.
This unrelenting physical suffering became the explicit subject matter for her most powerful and visceral art of this final period. Let's look closely at some of these works, which are almost medical documents of her agony.
These late paintings are unflinching. Take, for instance, Broken Column from 1944. In this painting, she depicts her own body split open, revealing a crumbling Ionic-style column replacing her damaged spine. Her body is pierced all over with nails, yet her eyes stare straight out at the viewer, stoic and defiant.
And she's held together only by the corset.
The plaster and metal corset she was forced to wear. The use of the classical column suggests a critique of the historical and medical systems that tried and failed to repair her. She is using the language of high art to document physical breakdown.
And what about the wounded deer? It's a shocking image that seems to merge her physical state with mythological symbolism.
The Wounded Deer from 1946 is a devastating piece. Kahlo paints herself with the body of a young stag, wounded by 9 arrows, standing in a desolate, stormy forest.
And it's her face on the deer's head.
Her own face, serene and pained, stares out from the deer's head. The body is a metaphor for her suffering right after one of her failed spinal surgeries. The arrows represent the continuous, sharp jolts of pain she felt.
And what does the stag represent?
By merging herself with the stag, a symbol of purity and sacrifice, she connects her personal suffering to the broader tradition of martyrdom and cultural anguish. The painting is signed, chillingly, Little Deer.
Even as she was confined, her political commitment to communism never wavered. Did her final works reflect this singular focus?
Absolutely. She rejoined the Mexican Communist Party in 1948 and became even more ideologically fervent as her body failed her. She explicitly dedicated the limited energy her health allowed to the revolutionary communist movement.
Declaring that she wanted her art to be useful.
Useful to the revolutionary communist movement, the only real reason to live. This commitment led to explicitly political final works. For instance, Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick.
What's that one about?
It depicts her throwing away her crutches while being supported by the strong, healing hands of Karl Marx. She also painted a highly controversial, overtly political portrait, Frida and Stalin. Her final focus was ideological survival, not personal fame.
This intense defiance led to her spectacular final public act, her first solo exhibition in Mexico in 1953, staged by Lola Alvarez Bravo.
It was the ultimate theater of the self. Her doctors had strictly prescribed bed rest and absolutely forbade her attendance, but Kahlo was never one to obey.
So what did she do?
She ordered her iconic 4-poster bed to be dismantled and moved from La Casa Azul directly to the gallery. To the utter amazement of the crowd, she arrived by ambulance, carried in on a stretcher by her attendants, and was placed directly into the bed.
In the middle of the gallery.
In the middle of the gallery, draped with flowers and photographs, she spent the entire duration of the party holding court, drinking, singing, and celebrating with her guests. It was a spectacular, triumphant act of rebellion against her own mortality.
That show of strength was tragically followed by her final rapid decline.
Yes. In 1953, her right leg had to be amputated at the knee due to rapidly progressing gangrene. This loss was psychologically catastrophic. She plunged into a deep, severe depression, and her dependence on painkillers escalated rapidly.
And she wrote about suicide in her diary.
Heartbreaking entries. She confessed, "I keep on wanting to kill myself. Diego is what keeps me from it, through my vain idea that he would miss me."
Despite the physical and psychological toll, her final public appearance was true to her core beliefs, just days before her death.
On July 6, 1954, Just 11 days before her passing, she participated in a demonstration with Rivera against the CIA invasion of Guatemala. She was incredibly ill and had to be pushed in her wheelchair, but she refused to let her failing body silence her political voice.
That act likely worsened her condition significantly.
It almost certainly did.
She died shortly after on July 13th, 1954, at the age of 47. While the official cause was pulmonary embolism, there is strong suspicion surrounding the circumstances of her death.
There is. No autopsy was performed, which fueled speculation. Suicide via overdose is strongly suspected by many historians. Her nurse later recounted that Kahlo had taken 11 painkillers the night she died, far exceeding the maximum prescribed dose of 7.
And her final diary entry
Remains one of the most stark and poignant farewells. I joyfully await the exit, and I hope never to return Frida.
And even her funeral was a legendary, spectacular final performance.
Her body lay in state in the Palacio de Bellas Artes, prominently draped under a communist flag, a final political statement. She was then cremated according to her wishes. The event, according to legend, was dramatic.
What did they say happened?
Mourners claimed to witness her hair catching fire as her body was placed in the oven, and her corpse momentarily sat up, her face forming, as one mourner recalled, one last seductive grin before the flames consumed her. Her ashes are kept at La Casa Azul, which opened as a museum 4 years later.
It is genuinely astonishing to realize that despite the international exhibitions in the 1930s and 40s, Kahlo was largely forgotten, or at best, known merely as Diego Rivera's exotic wife until the late 1970s. What cultural forces finally brought about her profound rediscovery?
Her rediscovery was a perfect storm, driven by multiple intellectual and political movements intersecting in the 70s and 80s. First, feminist scholars began forcefully questioning the established art historical canon, demanding to know why talented female and non-Western artists had been systematically excluded.
And second,
the Chicano movement in the United States adopted her as a powerful symbol of Mexican heritage and resistance. For Chicano artists and activists, she represented a defiant, indigenous-rooted identity.
and then we saw her life story packaged for a mass audience.
Exactly. The 1982 joint retrospective she shared with the photographer Tina Madati at the Whitechapel Gallery in London was instrumental in launching her profile in Europe. But the truly critical event was the 1983 biography by Hayden Herrera, Frida.
Frida, a biography of Frida Kahlo.
Yes, and this book became an international bestseller. It not only confirmed her artistic merit, but crucially unlocked the compelling, dramatic, and tragic narrative of her life for a global, non-academic audience.
This confluence of factors led to the cultural explosion that has been dubbed Freedomania. What does this phenomenon look like today, and how widespread is her appeal?
Freedomania describes the overwhelming popular and commercial appeal that has turned her into arguably the most instantly recognizable artist in the world. Her face, that striking self-portrait with the braided hair and the unibrow.
It's used, according to sources, with the same regularity and commercial elasticity as images of Che Guevara or Bob Marley.
It's unbelievable. She has transcended art history and become a general cultural icon.
She has definitely become a massive commercial and cultural proliferation machine. We see her name and image everywhere.
Everywhere. You see her on merchandise globally. Her style is appropriated relentlessly by the high fashion world. She has been fictionalized across media, from the award-winning Salma Hayek biopic Frida,
which introduced her story to a massive Hollywood audience,
to appearances in Disney Pixar's Coco, numerous stage performances, even operas. She is championed as a powerful, complex icon for marginalized communities.
Right. Feminists see her as a symbol of defiance against patriarchy.
The LGBTQ+ community celebrates her bisexuality and fluid gender presentation. And Chicanos and activists view her as both a victim who suffered greatly and a fierce survivor who fought back.
But this phenomenon of freedomania, while celebrating her, has generated significant critique among scholars and art historians. What is the fundamental objection to this mass commodification?
The critique is that the tragic, mythologized aspects of her biography have profoundly overshadowed the complexity of her art. Critics argue that Freedomania reduces her deep, multi-layered works to simple, literal descriptions of her life.
So they see a painting of a broken column and say, her back was broken, full stop.
Exactly. And they miss the political commentary, the Aztec symbolism, and the intentional self-fashioning she embedded in every single brushstroke.
Which means the commercial icon effectively obscures the political artist.
Precisely. It obscures the deeper and more disturbing truths in her work. Kahlo was a master of curating her own image, creating what some critics call a conscious theater of the self.
a characteristic that aligns her perfectly with contemporary celebrity sensibilities.
Yes, perhaps like a modern-day Cindy Sherman or Madonna. However, this focus on her celebrity, her suffering, and her aesthetics often sanitizes her intense, lifelong commitment to revolutionary communism, which was the stated purpose of her work.
Her importance is so vital to her home country that her body of work is actually protected as national heritage.
This is a huge factor in her current market status. In 1984, Mexico declared her entire body of work part of the national cultural heritage. And this declaration explicitly prohibits the export of her paintings.
Which means her masterpieces rarely appear in international auctions.
Right, and paradoxically, that drives the value of any work that does appear, like the self-portrait sold for $54.7 million to astronomical heights. Scarcity drives value.
Yet her significance transcends market values and governmental protection.
Absolutely. Her physical presence remains potent. Her home, La Casa Azul, is one of Mexico City's most popular museums, attracting close to 300,000 visitors yearly.
And in 2001, she achieved a different kind of national validation.
When she became the first Hispanic woman to be honored with a U.S. postage stamp, her influence stretches far beyond the canvas, permeating politics, identity, and global culture. Hashtag tag outro day.
So this deep dive into Frida Kahlo has shown an artist whose genius was inseparable from profound physical and emotional trauma, but whose work was fundamentally driven by a revolutionary commitment to Mexicanidad. We've traced the trajectory of an artist who used her own body as the subject for complex political allegory and witnessed the enduring tension between her complex artistic intent and her current status as a truly global commercial icon.
It is a remarkable journey, from the political rebellion of the cachuchas and the agony of the bus accident through the tumultuous marriages and the spectacular defiance of her final exhibition. And as we conclude our deep dives, we have to return to the explicit purpose she articulated for her work toward the end of her life. Kahlo aimed for her art to be useful to the revolutionary communist movement and to be worthy of the people to whom I belong.
A profound dedication to ideology over personal gain.
So, given the current reality of Fridomania, where her instantly recognizable face is licensed globally, plastered on everything from dolls and coffee mugs to high fashion, becoming a symbol consumed everywhere by the wealthy global market.
Yeah.
It raises an important question for you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive is finished. What revolutionary potential is lost, or perhaps fundamentally transformed, when an artist who desired usefulness for the people becomes an image consumed and sanitized globally by the mechanics of the very capitalism she fiercely rejected?
A powerful contradiction to sit with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you.